The unexpected grief of downsizing. Why letting go of stuff feels like losing pieces of you. It starts small. A drawer, a cabinet, maybe the coat closet by the door. You open it with the full intention of just getting organized, and suddenly you're sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by things you haven't seen in years, things you forgot you still had, a scarf you never wore but couldn't bring yourself to toss, a stack of birthday cards from people long gone, the sweater your child wore on their first day of school. And then something tightens in your chest. Not panic, not sadness exactly. Just something heavy, like saying goodbye but without anyone there to hug. They call it downsizing, like it's a tidy logistical task, a smart move, a fresh start, as if letting go of physical objects is some sterile process of numbers and square footage. Fewer rooms, fewer closets, less stuff. But no one tells you that downsizing is grief in disguise. Quiet grief. The kind that hides in Tupperware lids and dusty photo albums. The kind that catches you off guard when you realize this isn't just clutter. It's memory. It's identity. It's you, spread across 1,000 little objects that no longer have a place in your next chapter. And suddenly it's not just about space anymore, it's about loss, about time, about closing the door on who you were at 30, 40, 50, and facing the terrifying beauty of who you're becoming now. That's the part no one talks about. We're told to be practical, to make room, to donate and discard, to travel light into the next season of life. But what happens when the things we're asked to leave behind aren't just things? What happens when the grief of letting go hits deeper than we expected? This isn't a video about how to pack. It's not a list of what to keep and what to toss. This is something else. This is about the ache, the resistance, the tenderness, the way it feels to touch an old book and remember the way you used to dream. The way your fingers hesitate over a chipped mug you haven't used in a decade, but still can't throw away. Downsizing isn't just practical, it's personal, it's deeply emotional. And for so many of us, it's unexpectedly painful. But it can also be something else, a doorway, a reckoning, a path to something freer, not because we forget the past, but because we choose what to carry forward, on purpose, with love. So if your heart feels heavy and your hands feel unsure, you're not doing this wrong. You're just doing something real, something sacred, and you don't have to do it alone. Let's talk about it. People love to say, it's just stuff, usually with a shrug, like it shouldn't matter so much, like the weight of a life can be separated from the things that held it. But the truth is, it's never just stuff. That mug on your shelf, it's not about ceramic. It's about the Saturday mornings you spent sipping coffee next to someone you loved. That coat in the back of your closet, it's not about the fabric. It's about the person you were when you wore it. The confidence, the nervousness, the time in your life when everything felt new. We don't collect things because we're materialistic. We collect them because they're the bookmarks of our story. That recipe card with your mother's handwriting, even though it's stained and nearly unreadable. That keychain from a trip you barely remember but kept because someone you miss gave it to you. That old tool in the garage your father once used. They are echoes. Proof that we were there. That someone loved us. That we loved back. And so when we start letting go of these objects, when we downsize, we're not just reorganizing. We're dismantling a personal museum. We're packing away pieces of ourselves. And every choice, keep this, let go of that, feels like choosing which memories to carry and which to leave behind. That's the power stuff holds. Not because it's valuable in the market sense, but because it's valuable in the soul sense. It bears witness. It's been with us through it all. So if you've ever felt silly for crying over an old sweatshirt or hesitated over a cracked photo frame, don't. That hesitation is love. That grief is connection. That emotion means you're still human, because no, it's not just stuff, it never was. If someone were to walk through your home today, they might see coats, papers, trinkets, and piles. Maybe they'd think you have too much. Maybe they'd say, you should really clean this out. But they wouldn't see what you see. They wouldn't know that behind that drawer full of ticket stubs and postcards is the summer you finally felt free. That tucked in that box in the attic is a baby blanket you held against your chest during midnight feedings. that between those recipe books is a handwritten note from a friend you lost too soon. Closets and drawers, they're time capsules. Not messy, not excessive, just full of unspoken chapters. That pile of old letters? That's not clutter. That's the sound of someone's voice you haven't heard in years. That wedding dress in the back of the wardrobe? You might never wear it again, but it held your breath and your heartbeat in a moment you thought would last forever. And even the things you don't remember saving, the rubber bands, the faded calendars, the paintbrushes that haven't seen a stroke in years, those are traces of who you were. The planner, the dreamer, the creator, the parent, the partner, the friend. Letting go of these things means holding them in your hands one last time. It means touching that memory and deciding how much space it still needs in your life. It's intimate work, emotional work, because every drawer we open has a story. Every box we pull down whispers something back to us. And sometimes we sit on the floor, surrounded by objects and dust and time, and we cry, not because we're overwhelmed by the mess, but because we're overwhelmed by the memories. There is life hiding in our closets, real life, our life. And that's why it's so hard to let go, not because we're hoarders, but because we're human. And humans remember, through photos, through smells, through scraps of paper and pieces of string. We remember not just in our minds, but in the things that stayed with us. So before you judge the drawer, pause. Sit with it. Let the memory come. Let it hurt if it has to. Let it speak. Because that's where the grief is. And that's where the healing begins. There's a particular kind of sadness that comes when a room goes quiet in a new way. Not because there's no one talking, but because something that used to live there, something that carried memory, energy, comfort, is gone. You carry out the bookshelf. Suddenly the wall feels too bare. You roll up the rug. Now the footsteps echo. You take down the framed photos. And the room forgets who it belonged to. It's strange, isn't it? How a space can mourn with you. No one tells you how loud and empty room can feel. Not just the sound of your footsteps, but the absence of everything familiar. The missing chair where your spouse always sat. The desk that used to be buried under papers and half-finished letters. The scent that used to linger. Faint perfume or old books or lemon oil on the table. When you begin to downsize, you don't just lose objects. You lose the physical arrangement of your life. The way things fit. The quiet order that made you feel safe, held at home. And it hits you in the most unexpected moment. When you walk into that now empty room and your heart whispers, something used to happen here. It's not just grief for the stuff, it's grief for the living that took place in that space. The holidays, the arguments, the late night snacks, the music, the laughter, the life. And now the space feels exposed, unfamiliar, like someone else's home, even though the paint still holds your fingerprints. This is what we don't say out loud. That letting go of physical space can feel like erasing your presence from a life you built. That the hollow sound of an empty room can feel like your own absence echoing back at you. But here's the truth. An empty room doesn't erase your life. It reflects it. It honors the chapters you wrote there. And sometimes, when it's quiet, enough you can almost hear your memories settle gently into the walls, grateful for the time they had. There's a moment somewhere in the middle of downsizing when you pause, your hands full of something you've held onto for years. And a question comes, uninvited, but loud. Who am I if I let this go? It's not always a dramatic object. Sometimes, it's small. A work badge from a job you retired from long ago, a stack of old journals, a drawer of tools you haven't used in years. But the object itself isn't what makes you hesitate, it's what it represents. You spent decades being the reliable one, the provider, the mom who always knew where the band-aids were, the teacher with the best bulletin boards, the craftsman who could fix anything. You were known for something. Your home reflected it, so did your stuff. But now, with time passing and space shrinking, you're being asked, sometimes gently, sometimes urgently, to set those things aside, to release them, to clear the space. And what rises in you might not be sadness, but fear. Fear that without these things you won't know who you are anymore. That letting go of the symbols of your former life will strip away the last bits of identity you still recognize. That without your workshop, your books, your sewing machine, your garden tools, you'll simply become an older person in a smaller place. We don't talk about that part of aging. The identity shift. The shrinking of not just homes, but of labels, of roles, of purpose. It's easy for others to say, "You'll always be you." But they didn't spend 40 years building a life around these things. They didn't feel their sense of usefulness dissolve when the calendar no longer filled up. That's what downsizing threatens to take, the reflection of who you once were. But here's the part that matters. You are not just the roles you played. You are not just the things you did or the objects that reminded you. You are the wisdom behind the work, the story behind the stuff, the soul behind the space. And while it's painful to let go of things that once defined you, it's also a chance to see yourself anew. To ask not, "What did I used to do?" but "Who am I now, without the props, without the stage?" The answer might come quietly, slowly, in unexpected places. But it's there. You're still here. And who you are now is still worthy of space. There's this idea that once you reach a certain age, you're supposed to let go gracefully. You hear it everywhere. From well-meaning kids, from neighbors, from articles online. It's time to declutter, time to simplify, time to stop holding on, and maybe they're right, but the way it's said, the way it's expected, it leaves no room for grief. No room for the messy emotions that come up when the life you built starts getting packed into boxes, as if it's no longer necessary. There's a kind of pressure that creeps in, not always spoken outright, but you feel it. The realtor who walks through your home and makes a passing comment about dated furniture. The adult child who casually says, "You're not really using this anymore, are you?" The friend who brags about how liberating it is to get rid of everything. They don't mean harm, but they don't feel what you feel. They don't see the timeline attached to that chair in the corner, the hours spent reading, the conversations that happened with coffee in hand. They don't feel the ache that rises when you see a pile of possessions reduced to a list of what fits in the new space. And so you do what many of us do. You smile, you nod, you agree that yes, it's just stuff. But inside, something breaks off in pieces, quietly, privately. Because no one else seems to be mourning what you're losing, you start to wonder if you should be mourning it at all. That's the lonely part, not just the letting go, but the feeling that you're grieving something no one else even sees as a loss, that what matters to you deeply seems invisible to others. So you sit with that box of old cookbooks or that cabinet full of holiday decorations, and you hesitate, not just because of the memory, but because it feels like you're the only one who remembers why it matters. But I want to say this gently. You're allowed to feel it. You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to grieve. Letting go is not weakness, and needing a moment to say goodbye to something meaningful is not a flaw. It's a sign of how deeply you've lived. There's a kind of goodbye that isn't said with words, but with the click of a storage bin, the sealing of a box, the sweep of an empty shelf. Downsizing doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like mourning, because what you're letting go of isn't just things. It's a life. A home that held decades of dreams. A garden you planted when your children were small. A dining room table that once overflowed with laughter and dishes and stories from every corner of your family. A garage that echoed with projects you started and sometimes finished. And now, it's time to let it go. But how do you say goodbye to a life that wasn't perfect but was deeply yours? How do you thank the walls that stood through your heartbreak? The hallway that heard your footsteps for so many mornings? The kitchen where you made meals not because you had to, but because you knew they meant something? There's no ceremony for that. No eulogy, no flowers, no formal farewell. Just you, standing in the middle of a space that used to know you. And silence. It's easy to feel guilty for loving a home so much, for struggling to part with it, for hesitating over a life transition that everyone else sees as logical, economical, or necessary. But here's the thing. Grief doesn't wait for permission. It shows up anyway. Because even if you're excited for what's next, you can still feel the ache of leaving behind what once was. You can still miss the feel of that sunlit room in the morning, the way the wind hit the windows at night, the floorboard that creaked when you walked by with tired feet and a quiet heart. Downsizing asks you to close a door that once opened to everything. And that's not just change, that's loss. So if it feels heavy, it's because it is. If it feels tender, sacred, complicated, it's because you're human. And the life you're saying goodbye to mattered. But here's the quiet truth. The love you had for that life doesn't disappear. It lives in you, not just in rooms or things. And the goodbye you're saying doesn't mean it's over. It means it happened. It was real. And you were there for all of it. And that is something to be proud of. There's a point you reach somewhere near the end of the process, not necessarily after the last box is sealed, but sometime during the quiet that follows, when something shifts. The grief hasn't disappeared, but it no longer chokes you. It sits beside you instead, like an old friend you've made peace with. You begin to realize that the act of letting go was never about forgetting. It was about honoring. It was about recognizing that what those things represented, the memories, the people, the versions of yourself, they did their job. They got you here. And maybe it's okay to thank them, then release them. Maybe that coat from your first job doesn't need to be in your closet anymore. Maybe that worn chair doesn't belong in this new chapter, not because it didn't matter, but because it already gave you what it came to give. Comfort, familiarity, a place to land. You don't lose the past by clearing the room. You lose it by never really looking at it. And now you've looked, you've touched, you've wept, you've remembered. That's the sacred part of downsizing no one talks about. The way it gives you a chance to touch your life again. To hold it piece by piece, memory by memory, and say, yes, this happened. This was real. And now it's time to carry only what still brings me peace. Because in the space that opens up, physically, emotionally, spiritually, you start to feel something else rising. Room. Not just for new furniture or fewer things, but room for clarity, for stillness, for meaning, for light. You may not be able to keep everything you once thought you needed, but you begin to see that what you do keep matters even more. The photos that truly capture love, the books you'll read again, the tools you still reach for, the one recipe you remember by heart, and then, unexpectedly, you begin to breathe easier. You notice the sunlight falling across the floor, where before there were stacks. You sit in a quieter room and don't feel empty. You feel grounded. Not because everything is gone, but because what remains was chosen. With intention, with love, with the wisdom that only time and loss and letting go can bring. Some people will never understand what it means to grieve a house, or a teacup, or a stack of folded napkins. They'll tell you it's just part of moving forward. They'll expect you to toss, pack, donate, smile. But you and I both know it's not that simple. Because when you let go of the things that held your life together, you don't just lose the object. You feel the moment again, the memory, the meaning, and you mourn it all, silently, sometimes with no one watching. That's not weakness, that's reverence, because letting go when done with love is not forgetting. It's remembering deeply enough to say goodbye. It's giving thanks. It's choosing to carry the memory, not the weight. Downsizing isn't about reducing your life, it's about refining it, about choosing what you still need, not just to survive, but to feel whole. And if today you're in the middle of that process, if you're sitting among boxes staring at the life you built, unsure what to keep and what to release, then let me say this gently. You're doing something sacred. You are not silly for feeling attached. You are not weak for needing more time. And you are not alone. You're not just organizing. You're honoring. You're remembering. You're holding your life in your hands and saying, thank you. And when you're ready, you'll let go. Not because you have to, but because your heart knows what can stay. and what can finally rest. Because the truth is, you never really lose the life you loved. You carry it. In your smile, in your breath, in your knowing, and in the spaces you now have room to fill, with peace, with presence, with joy. This isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a simpler, softer chapter, one where you are lighter, but never less. So when the last box is taped shut and the rooms are quiet, listen. That sound? It's not absence. It's your life, gently shifting forward, ready to be lived again.